Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, today we're going to unpack a really fascinating story. It might just reshape how you view one of the world's most enduring nations, Iran, known anciently, of course, as Persia.
Exactly. And this journey, it stretches back millennia. It connects ancient history with, well, today's headlines in some pretty unexpected ways.
Yeah, so our mission here is to explore how this land, often a focus of modern conflict and ambition, has this kind of paradoxical destiny. It goes from being a foundational ally to a prophetic adversary, and it's all woven into these millennia-old sacred texts. We're talking about the narratives and prophecies mainly in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm. And what's truly compelling here, I think, is how these ancient perspectives trace Persia's shifting roles. From its very beginnings, then becoming an instrument of what these texts describe as divine purpose, then a powerful empire, and even a key player in significant future events.
Right. So we're going to delve into its story, mostly under its ancient name, Persia.
Yeah, primarily Persia.
Get ready, because you're likely to discover some truly unexpected connections jumping out from these old writings. This isn't just like a historical timeline. It's more of a narrative that reveals some pretty astonishing foresight, hinting at a destiny foretold a long, long time ago.
It really is.
So let's begin right at the start, as these ancient narratives describe it. After the Great Flood, humanity gets a fresh start. And it's in this early world that the land of Persia first emerges through Noah's lineage.
That's right. These foundational accounts, they sort of give us the first map of nations, and they point to two key figures, two patriarchs, whose descendants would eventually contribute to what became the Persian Empire, Madai and Elam.
Madai and Elam.
He was a son of Japheth, and he's associated with the Medes. These were rugged people who settled in the northern mountains of modern-day Iran, known for being tough mountaineers, strong tribal structures.
Okay, the Medes in the north, and Elam.
Elam came from Shem's line. His descendants, the Elamites, they established themselves down south in the fertile lands near the Persian Gulf, southwestern Iran. And what's really crucial to grasp here is that Elam wasn't insignificant, not at all.
Right.
These texts actually portray them as a formidable nation, and quite strikingly, they're described as the very first nation to attack what these texts call the people of faith, the early Israelites.
Wow, the first nation.
That's how it's framed. And this leads us straight into what many consider the first major international war recorded in these narratives. It's all there in Genesis chapter 14. You have 4 eastern kings, including this powerful Elamite king, Chedorlaomer.
Got it.
They joined forces, invaded Canaan, and actually captured Lot, who was Abraham's nephew.
Okay, so Abraham's nephew gets captured by this Elamite-led coalition. What does Abraham do?
Well, this is where it gets incredible. Abraham, showing amazing strategic courage, doesn't hesitate. He takes only 318 trained servants. I mean, imagine that, 318 men.
Against 4 kings and their armies. Seems impossible.
Exactly. But he pursues them, attacks them by night, and completely defeats them. Rescues Lot, frees all the captives, routs these eastern kings.
That's an unbelievable victory.
It really is portrayed as such, a triumph against all human odds. And this impossible victory, it kind of reveals a profound theme that echoes later. That no earthly power, no matter how big, could ultimately win against those under this specific divine protection.
Interesting point.
And the Elamites, well, despite this defeat, they didn't just disappear. Centuries pass. And these tribes, the Elamites and the Medes living in that same general area, eastern Mesopotamia, they quietly start to come together. They grow into something much bigger than just separate tribes.
Okay, so fast forward through those centuries. We see these groups, Elamites and Medes, growing stronger and eventually forming the Persian Empire we know from history. And what's really remarkable, as these ancient writings suggest, is how nations often seen as pagans were sometimes used as instruments within a larger divine plan.
Precisely. Take the prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah. They declared 2 really astonishing prophecies about Persia. First, they foretold that God, as the texts describe it, would use Elam and Media as agents to punish Babylon.
Punish Babylon? Why?
Because Babylon had ruthlessly destroyed Jerusalem and its sacred temple. So this was framed as divine justice.
Okay, using Persia to punish Babylon, what was the second prophecy?
The second one was even more stunning. It predicted that God wouldn't just use Persia for punishment, but also for liberation. Isaiah actually named a pagan Persian king Cyrus.
Named him?
Yes, named him Cyrus, more than 150 years before the man was even born, declaring he would be God's chosen agent to free Israel from exile in Babylon and order the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem.
Wow. Named 150 years in advance.
Well,
That's specific.
extremely specific. And both prophecies came true with startling accuracy. You see Mede leaders like Deus's uniting tribes, building their capital Ecbatana. Then his grandson Cyaxares builds this powerful army, destroys Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, who were longtime oppressors of Israel. This really paved the way.
Right, setting the stage.
Meanwhile, as Persia's influence is growing, its destiny is revealed even further. And this happens through a young Hebrew prisoner in Babylon, a man named Daniel.
Ah, Daniel. Famous figure.
Very. King Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian ruler, has this disturbing dream, right? A giant statue made of different metals. He's deeply troubled.
The statue dream, yes. Gold head, silver chest.
Exactly. And it's Daniel who stands before him and, with what the texts call heavenly authority, reveals not just the dream but its meaning. Daniel says, "You, O king, you are the head of gold. But after you, another kingdom will rise, inferior to yours, depicted by the chest and arms of silver."
The silver chest and arms, representing Medo-Persia.
That's the interpretation Daniel gives. Not just one nation, but two forces bound together, the Medes and the Persians, united but unequal.
Unequal how?
The Persian arm, Daniel implies, would rise stronger and eventually dominate Media, so it was a clear prophecy. Babylon, the head of gold, would fall. The throne would pass to this new rising empire, Medo-Persia.
And fall it did. Dramatically right. King Belshazzar's feast.
Oh, one of the most dramatic nights described in these accounts. Belshazzar, Nebuchadnezzar's grandson, throws this huge banquet, and he sacrilegiously uses the sacred vessels looted from the Jerusalem temple to toast his own gods.
That sounds like asking for trouble.
Well, according to the narrative, trouble arrives. Suddenly, this invisible hand appears, writes 4 mysterious words on the palace wall. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin.
The writing on the wall. Chilling.
Absolutely. Daniel is summoned again, his interpretation. Terrifyingly direct.
Oh.
God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians.
Wow. And it happened immediately.
That very night, the text says, Cyrus's army had done something ingenious, diverted the Euphrates River, which flowed through Babylon. They marched quietly into the city along the dry riverbed through gates that had been left unlocked. King Belshazzar was slain. Babylon fell to the Persians.
Just like Daniel interpreted.
Exactly as foretold. And the impact was just profound. Imagine, the Jewish people, exiled for 70 years, suddenly see this impossible dream come true. This foreign king, Cyrus, a pagan king, issues a decree allowing them to return home to Jerusalem.
Not just allows them, right, he helps them.
He even finances the rebuilding of their temple, sends Jewish leaders like Zerubbabel and Joshua to lead the effort.
So Persia, instead of being an enemy, becomes the nation that rebuilds Israel.
That's the incredible irony, fulfilling that astonishingly precise prophecy about Cyrus.
But the story of Persia in these texts doesn't stop there, does it? Daniel had more visions.
He did further visions that detailed Persia's power, but also its ultimate destiny. One vision described a beast like a massive bear. It was raised up on one side, and it had 3 ribs clutched between its teeth.
A bear raised on one side with
Yeah.
ribs. Okay, what does that mean?
Well, the bear being raised on one side vividly symbolized the Medo-Persian Empire, but specifically Persia's eventual dominance over Media, the stronger side.
Ah, like the silver arms in the statue dream, one stronger.
Precisely. And those 3 ribs, they're generally interpreted as representing its 3 major conquests, Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt,
And did that happen?
with chilling accuracy. After Cyrus conquered Lydia and Babylon, his son, Cambyses II, marched his armies across the Sinai Desert and conquered Egypt. He tore that 3rd rib right out.
Wow. Okay, what other visions?
There was another key one. Daniel saw a ram with 2 horns, one horn taller than the other, charging fiercely.
The 2 horns, again, Medes and Persians, Persia taller.
Exactly. This ram is charging powerfully. But then, a swift goat with a single prominent horn appears suddenly from the west. It charges the ram with incredible fury, knocks him down, tramples him.
A goat from the west defeats the Persian ram. What does the goat represent?
Daniel's interpretation again is startlingly clear. The goat represents Greece, under Alexander the Great, destined to overthrow Persia with what's described as almost supernatural speed.
Alexander the Great. So Persia's eventual fall was also prophesied.
Yes, its rise, its dominance, and its eventual defeat by Greece.
But before that defeat, Persia had its golden age, right?
Yeah.
A vast empire.
Oh, absolutely. A huge empire, stretching from India all the way to Ethiopia. The throne was established in the grand city of Susa in modern southwestern Iran.
So Susa, And that's where the story of Esther takes place, isn't it?
Precisely. In Susa, one of the most uh, unexpected miracles described in these ancient writings, a story where an entire empire is essentially saved by the courage of one woman.
Tell us about that. King Ahasuerus.
Often identified as Xerxes I, he banishes his queen, Vashti, then starts a search for a new queen. And among the young women brought to the palace is an orphan named Hadassah. She's Jewish, raised by her cousin Mordecai, but her nationality is kept secret in the palace.
She gets a new name too, right? Esther.
Esther, yes. And she finds favor with the king, captures his heart, and is crowned Queen of Persia, all without the king knowing she's Jewish.
Okay, so she's queen, but then danger arises.
Serious danger. A man named Haman rises to become the king's highest official, basically second in command. Now, Mordecai, Esther's cousin, who's also an official, refuses to kneel before Haman.
Why not?
As a devout Jew, he would only bow to God. This infuriates Haman. His immense pride is wounded, and Haman decides not just to punish Mordecai, but to plot the annihilation of all Jews throughout the entire vast Persian Empire.
Annihilation. Just because one man wouldn't bow.
His pride was apparently that consuming. He cleverly persuades the king, gets the decree sealed with the royal ring. It looks like doom for the Jewish people.
So what does Esther do? She's the queen, but she's also Jewish, secretly.
She finds out about the decree, and she's terrified. To intervene, she has to approach the king uninvited.
And that was forbidden.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It carried an automatic death penalty unless the king specifically extended his golden scepter to spare the person's life.
A huge risk.
Immense. But with incredible courage, she decides to do it. She fasts, prays, and then walks into the king's inner court. And what the text describes as divine favor is upon her. The king isn't angry. He extends the scepter. Her life is spared.
Phew. Okay, so she's safe. What then? Does she immediately expose Haman?
Not quite yet. She's very strategic. She invites the king and Haman to a private banquet.
Just the three of them?
Yes. And then she invites them to a second banquet the next day. Haman is absolutely puffed up with pride about this special attention. It's at that second banquet that Esther finally makes her move. She bravely reveals her own Jewish identity and exposes Haman's wicked plot to annihilate her people.
How did the king react?
He was furious. Justice was swift. Haman was hanged on the very gallows he'd prepared for Mordecai. Poetic justice, really.
Wow. So Haman is gone, but the decree to kill the Jews is still out there, right? Sealed with the king's ring.
Good point. A Persian law sealed with the ring couldn't be revoked, so a new decree was issued. This new decree, also sealed with the ring, granted the Jews the right to assemble and defend themselves against anyone who might try to attack them on the day originally set for their destruction.
So they could fight back.
Yes. And when the day came, instead of being a day of annihilation, it became a day of triumph and deliverance for the Jewish people throughout the empire.
That's incredible. So if you think about it, the Persian Empire, maybe without even realizing it, became this sort of fortress, a throne, and a shield for God's people at that critical time.
That's a great way to put it. A shield, definitely. And the story doesn't end there. Centuries later, Persia, although kind of phased from the main narrative for a while, it quietly reemerges at a really pivotal moment.
Which moment is that?
The birth of the Messiah. The accounts in the Gospel of Matthew describe Magi from the east arriving in Jerusalem.
The wise men.
Right, the wise men. They ask, "Where is the newborn king of the Jews? We have seen his star rise in the east and have come to worship him."
And these magi, they were likely from Persia.
While their nationality isn't explicitly stated, the evidence strongly suggests these learned men, astronomers, and priests, known as magi, came from the lands of the old Medo-Persian Empire, modern-day Iran and surrounding areas.
Why Persia specifically?
Well, the Magi were historically centered in that region. They were renowned for their knowledge of astronomy, ancient writings, and prophetic traditions. And it's highly probable, many scholars think, that among the scrolls they studied were the writings of the prophet Daniel.
Daniel again. Because he served in the courts of Babylon and Persia centuries earlier.
Exactly. And Daniel had indeed written prophecies about the timing of the Messiah's coming, particularly in Daniel chapter 9.
So the Magi might have been following Daniel's prophecies, guided by the star.
It's a very strong possibility. They journeyed, guided by this celestial sign, carrying those symbolic gifts. Gold for kingship, frankincense for divinity, myrrh for the sacrifice he would eventually make.
That's quite something.
And what's really remarkable here, connecting back to our theme, is that Persia, the nation that once freed Israel, helped rebuild its temple, now becomes the very first nation, through these wise men to honor its savior, as described in these texts.
Fulfilling prophecy again, in a way.
It seems so. Not just a coincidence, but presented as a deeply significant moment in this whole unfolding narrative.
But the story of Iran or Persia in these ancient texts doesn't end nicely in Bethlehem, does it? There's a shift towards the future.
That's right. The narrative continues, projecting into the future. And here we encounter one of the most compelling and often debated episodes of prophetic future found in these writings.
Which is?
The War of Gog and Magog, which is detailed in Ezekiel chapter 38.
Gog and Magog. I've heard of that. Sounds ominous.
It's depicted as a major conflict. Ezekiel describes the specific coalition of nations rising up in what the texts call the final days against Israel. And Persia, modern-day Iran, is named right at the beginning, among the very first nations listed in this coalition.
Iran is named specifically. Alongside whom?
Alongside Gog, who's described as a powerful leader from the far north, often linked by interpreters to Russia, or perhaps a broader Eurasian coalition. And other nations are mentioned too. Kush, which is ancient Sudan, Put, ancient Libya, Gomer, and Togarma, generally associated with Turkey or the Caucasus region.
Quite a coalition, and their goal.
Their stated common goal, according to Ezekiel, is to surge like a storm against the land of Israel, intending to plunder and conquer.
So Persia, which was once a protector, is now prophesied to be part of an invasion force against Israel.
That's the dramatic turn described. And the outcome. The texts declare that this attack will provoke what's called direct intervention by God, leading to severe judgment on these invading armies, things like massive earthquakes, fire from heaven, even confusion causing them to fight each other.
So judgment for Persia for aligning against Israel and God's will, according to this prophecy.
That's the implication. Persia, once a deliverer, faces judgment. However, there's a surprising twist, almost paradoxical.
Another twist.
Yes, found in the prophecies of Jeremiah, specifically concerning Elam, that ancient part of Persia. Jeremiah prophesies judgment, saying, "I will shatter the bow of Elam," which was their symbol of military might. But then he adds, "Yet nevertheless in the last days I will restore the captives of Elam, declares the Lord."
Restore the captives of Elam, even after judgment. That raises a big question, doesn't it? What does that mean for Iran's ultimate fate?
Exactly. It highlights this two-sided prophecy. Judgment is foretold, yes, but also this unexpected promise of eventual restoration.
So even in judgment, the door for redemption isn't completely closed, according to Jeremiah.
That seems to be the message these texts convey. That door remains open. And, Persia's biblical history, maybe more than many other nations, it kind of mirrors the human story itself, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Redeemed, then fallen, judged, but ultimately potentially restored by grace.
What an incredible journey we've traced through these ancient narratives. It really is something. From Genesis, where Persia first emerges through Elam and Media, through his astonishing role as an instrument of liberation, protecting the Jewish people with Esther, to honoring the Messiah with the Magi, and then its projected role in these future prophecies, both as an adversary and potentially eventually restored.
It really underscores the cyclical, deeply intertwined nature of Persia's involvement throughout what these texts present as sacred history, a key player again and again.
So what does this all mean for us, the listener, thinking about this today?
Well, I think this deep dive serves as perhaps both a profound warning, a warning to empires or nations that choose to defy what these narratives call divine principles, and also a powerful promise to those, whether nations or individuals, who choose a path of repentance and alignment.
A warning and a promise.
And maybe a final thought for you, listener, to mull over. These ancient writings suggest that in the final days, many nations will actually journey to Jerusalem to worship the King. What's fascinating to consider is, perhaps even Elam, Iran, once a redeemer, then a foe, judged. Maybe it too will witness some kind of restored glory if it ultimately turns its face toward these principles.
That's a provocative thought to end on.
As you reflect on today's world events, the headlines, what stands out to you? Do you see any echoes, any signs perhaps of these ancient prophecies potentially unfolding? Something to think about?
Definitely something to think about. We really hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and given you some new perspectives on a nation with such a long and complex history in these texts. Keep exploring, keep questioning. And please join us next time for another deep dive into the depths of knowledge.